Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fifth meeting of 2025 of the Economy and Fair Work Committee. Our first item of business is the final session of our inquiry into city, region and regional growth deals. I'm pleased to welcome our panel this morning: Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic; Kate Bryson, Head of East and West Scotland Growth Deals; Kimberly Daly, Head of Highlands Islands, Edinburgh and South of Scotland Growth Deals; and Anne-Marie Martin, Deputy Director for Regional Economic Development within the Scottish Government. As always, can I ask members and witnesses to keep questions and answers as concise as possible, and can I invite the Deputy First Minister to make a short opening statement.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thanks to the committee. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss city and regional growth deals, which I think have been one of the most successful economic interventions that we have seen over the last few years. And of course, each of them are tripartite agreements between ourselves, the UK Government and local authorities. As the committee will know, the growth deals align significant long-term funding behind shared objectives for regional economies. And there's a suite of projects and of programmes that are designed to deliver on those objectives at a practical level. We've committed over £1.9 billion to regional growth deals across Scotland, and together with the UK Government support, the total investment committed so far is £3.4 billion over 20 years. £1.1 billion of that has been paid out so far. Every growth deal is uniquely aligned to local circumstance and identifies priorities like building infrastructure, innovation, key assets and skills to stimulate economic growth. And the projects supported through the deals are selected, designed and delivered by local authorities and other regional partners who know their areas best. That ensures local decision making, which is in the best interests of communities. And they work on a wide range of themes designed to capitalise on specialisms, resources and specific niches. Innovations projects supported by the deals, which the committee will be aware of, include the National Robotarium, the Bayes Centre, other data-driven innovation hubs in Edinburgh and the south east of Scotland. They're working at the forefront of AI and data science to create future industries and high-value jobs. The Dairy Nexus in Dumfries supports innovation and decarbonisation in the dairy sector. The Shelvolution project, part of the Islands deal, is working with industry to boost the sustainability and yield capacity of the mussel growing sector in Shetland. Infrastructure projects supported by the deals include a number of affordable housing developments. Transport projects are improving connectivity for people in rural areas. For example, the Bus Revolution project in the Murray deal is creating an Uber-style on-demand bus service that people in that rural area can access. Skills projects supported by the deals work to tailor and target support to those furthest from the labour market. The Integrated Regional Employability and Skills project in the Edinburgh and South East Scotland deal, for example, has helped over 7,000 people to find or keep their jobs since it was established in 2019. With the Islands deal, we've got the redevelopment of the UHI Outer Hebrides campus and the opening of the Creed Hydrogen Skills facility. And those are just a few of the growth deal supported projects, and I chose them for my opening remarks to illustrate the breadth and variety of the deal projects. As I conclude, one of the core strengths of the growth deals is, of course, its long-term approach, which is to be commended. But the other core strength is the partnership approach that has created and facilitated. And as I said previously, I think that is unique, both between different local authorities working together for common goals and also between the Scottish and the UK governments, that has stood the test of time irrespective of the politics of the day. That partnership approach will always have its challenges in terms of complexity that it can add to the governance processes at time, and we continue to explore with the UK government these matters. But at the end of the day, if you look at the range of organisations sharing resources and working together for the benefit of regional economies and communities, it's a really impressive feature. And I've often thought it is a model to be replicated in other projects as well. As I reflect, I'm struck by how much has been delivered here through strong and sustained partnership. And I'm very happy to answer questions on anything specific. As we were coming here and speaking to the officials, we commented on the fact that having in-depth knowledge about every single aspect of every one of the 200 projects or so might be at times challenging, but we will do our level best to answer all of the committee's questions.
Thank you very much. Deputy First Minister, I'm sure we'll do our best to find those in-depth knowledge you have of all those growth deals. You've talked about the success of the deals and a number of examples of the projects that are being delivered. Could we not have delivered those projects and that success simply by using existing structures, enterprise agencies, councils? Why did we need to have an additional structure to add to what is quite a cluttered landscape?
So I think the short answer is no. What we needed to make these projects the product of a partnership between the UK Government, the Scottish Government and local authorities was a new governance structure. And of course, each of those projects, whether it's transport or housing, could probably have been delivered within existing structures, but you would have lost the added benefits that came from local authorities having to work together, from the Scottish Government and the UK Government working together, from Scottish Government and local authorities working together. Essentially, the nation, all the national bodies working together within a common governance arrangement that has been agreed to deliver on specific projects. So if you were to isolate each project and ask whether or not we could have delivered it, by and large, with a few exceptions where things are within a reserved space, for example, or benefit from being within a reserved space in terms of the involvement of the UK Government, they could have been delivered. But I think the real strength of the growth deals is the way in which it brought different partners together and compelled us to work collaboratively. And I think that in and of itself is an inherent advantage.
And do you have any tangible examples as to, apart from delivering the projects, which is the nature of the deals themselves, probably the most significant part of the deals, but a number of people like yourself have talked about that partnership. Do you think of any tangible benefits of that partnership over and above just delivering the projects? I mean, what does that partnership bring to the table?
Well, I'll ask the team if they've got anything more specific, but the advantage I see immediately is that it establishes greater financial power behind it. So for each of the partners, the budget they have committed is significant for them. But if you pull that together, you end up with a budget for each project that can do something really significant and substantial. So I'll see if anybody else has got any. Anne-Marie? I think it's automatic.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy First Minister. I think one of the key things that we see is cohesion and the partnership working and the ability to plan long term. So that definitely delivers an environment in which decision making can be taken collectively and in the round, so where projects complement each other or where there are dependencies. When you have lots of little individual projects, you don't necessarily have good visibility of how they would interconnect or interplay with each other. So I think that bringing together of parties to do it as a collective makes a big difference in terms of efficiency. I guess it's the kind of sum of the parts type argument. You know, individually they may have happened, as Deputy First Minister says, but would they have happened as quickly? Would they have happened and been cognisant of the rest of the operating environment and the rest of what was going on? And they can learn through that process as well.
The issue of timings is important because evidence to the committee has suggested that if you look at the Glasgow City Region deal as the earliest deal, that appears to have had an awful lot more autonomy than some of the more recent deals when it comes to making decisions around the scope and outcome of the project. But the feedback we've had in evidence is that current deals are being held up by the Scottish Government's assessment process. So why does it appear that the process has slowed when it comes to newer deals? What's changed?
So, to my mind, in terms of the way the projects have evolved, there are some differences in the approach to each of the deals. So some of the earliest deals happened and different partners learned lessons from what worked there and then applied those lessons to other deals. But by and large, in terms of the due diligence process, from the beginning, we have operated to Treasury Green Book standards in terms of due diligence. So that, you know, my point would be that there's unique elements to each of the deals. So, for example, we are actively working with the Ayrshire Growth deal because they had some challenges with some of the original proposals. So we are collaborating with them now, awaiting their proposals for what the UK Government and the Scottish Government will then go on to fund. So it's very difficult to make generalisations about all of the deals because there are so many unique elements to each deal. But in terms of the general principle, in terms of due diligence, operating to Treasury Green Book standards, that has remained the same. But again, I will rely on officials a little bit more than I normally would because this has been a multi-year process. So I don't know if Anne-Marie has anything to add to that.
Kate can come in on Glasgow specifically.
Okay, it's automatic, I think.
Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy First Minister. Yes, just to provide the convener with assurance, within Glasgow there is a slightly different model because they were part of the first kind of cohort of deals, along with some deals in the north of England, but they do still follow the same Green Book process. All business cases, all investment, all government investment through the deal, it still goes through the Green Book process, the same process that is across the Scottish deals. Glasgow also has a model whereby they are reviewed independently on a 5-yearly gateway process. They're actually just about to be part of a second, because they're moving into their 10th year, their second gateway process very shortly in March. So they have an additional actual level of scrutiny over and above some of the other remaining 11 deals in Scotland because they were part of that sort of first cohort of deals. So just to be assured that the level of governance and Green Book compliance for all of the investment across the deals in the Scottish programme is consistent.
So you reject the evidence that's from groups that it seems that the process seems to have been slowed compared to early deals, and I appreciate your explanation on the Glasgow one. What Cabinet Secretary is your response to the evidence we've had that the actual process itself is far too lengthy and it's holding up deals? I have an example currently at the moment on the Borderlands growth deal that was signed off by the government. The business case was approved in early 2023. There's one particular project that has been sitting with the Scottish Government going back and forward for the past 18 months with lots of queries on it, and that project is obviously now delayed, and obviously there's issues around rising costs and various other things. So there does seem to be feedback that we're getting that the process itself is very, very lengthy, and that's holding up projects.
So there is absolutely no appetite from us for things to take longer than they need to. When you are dealing with primarily three different organisations collaborating, then there is an added element to governance and getting agreement. But maybe I could ask Kimberly to specifically talk to the Borderlands, and it's automatic.
Certainly, may I ask which project?
Yeah, it's the one that came from Solway Firth Partnership, the Natural Capital Pilot Project that's been brought forward.
Yeah. So on the growth deals, all of the projects go through a range of experts looking at them to make them as strong as they can be, combining the expertise of a number of different areas within both governments and also within local authorities and local partners. The process for getting the projects approved depends on the quality of the business case that comes forward and how complete that is. I'm not aware of it's always an iterative process, and always we go back with some comments where there are gaps in the information that's provided to enable us to see that the project is valuable and viable. But I'm not aware of it being 18 months for that particular project.
Certainly the detailed business case was submitted in August 2023. I mean, so how lengthy is the assessment process from from effectively that business case being signed off to the final agreement from the Scottish Government? I mean, I've read somewhere it was 12 weeks, but this seems to have taken quite a few months.
It depends on the business case and the strength of the business case that comes forward, and if there are gaps in it, then we need to ask the local authorities and the partners to address those gaps to make sure that the project is as ready for delivery as it can be. It really does depend on the information that's provided to us. We've turned them round in a few weeks before. It just depends on the quality of what's provided to us.
And there's been no feedback to government from deals expressing any concerns over the length of time for final assessments?
I mean, in terms of our engagement with each growth deal, you know, just last week I met with a local authority that is working on a number of proposals as part of their growth deal, and the conversation was about the strength of the proposal and what additional information that we need. So there's a constant ongoing relationship, discussions with local authority partners, because we have, apart from one, we have agreed on largely on the financial commitment. The UK government's agreed. We need the deals to be successful, and there is obviously a prioritisation list that is agreed as part of the growth deal. But we need it to progress as quickly as possible. So there's zero interest from us in anything taking longer than it needs to. I would like things to be delivered as quickly as possible. So in terms of your point around feedback, I guess there would be an equal and opposite feedback from us often in those occasions, saying, well, we've asked for, you know, we have to operate to Treasury Green Book due diligence standards. We can't just agree to something unless it is a full case, a full business case, which answers all the queries. And it's not just within our control, it's also within the UK government's control. So in terms of that feedback point, I guess my challenge would be the feedback goes both ways, and where all partners believe something is not moving at the pace that it should, we can get round the table pretty quickly and say, well, we need additional information here. They'll maybe come back to us and say, well, can you respond to us within a shorter period of time? And so it's very much a discursive process. It's not a case of each of us inhabiting our own spheres and not communicating. So I think that's just to give a flavour.
I may come back to you on the specific example, because I think the concern was that some of the queries several months down the road could have been asked at the very start of that interaction. But you mentioned, Cabinet Secretary, the Ayrshire growth deal, so it's only appropriate I should therefore bring in Willie Coffey at this point.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Deputy First Minister and your colleagues. Just firstly turning to the Ayrshire growth deal, if I may. I'm looking at the annual report just issued in November there, and it shows that there has only been an 8% drawdown on the entire government commitment, both government commitment, 8% drawdown so far. And of that 8%, 70% of that is in one project. So it's really to ask you if the government, the Scottish Government, considers that that is good progress 5 years into the programme.
No, is the short answer. And the Ayrshire growth deal, and I'll ask colleagues to come in a moment, has been through, again, not to keep using the word unique, but has been through a uniquely challenging time due to reasons out with the control, really, of any of the tripartite partners. And so we are currently in a process of awaiting the formal proposals from the local partners on precisely where funding, which has been released because of initiatives that didn't proceed as hoped, can be redeployed. And that discursive process that I outlined to the convener is precisely what we are engaged in right now. So last week I engaged with the one of the chief executives on proposals, and as soon as we have the full business case on those proposals, we can then proceed. And it's also an issue that I'm in discussion with the Secretary of State for Scotland about. So I don't think any of us would like to have been, any of us would have hoped to have been in the situation we are right now, any of the partners, and now the commitment is to try and get clarification on the new projects and provide investment for them, because as Willie Coffey will know, there is no shortage of appetite to invest in Ayrshire right now. Do you want Kate to answer anything specific on Ayrshire?
I think unfortunately two of the early win sort of projects that were going to happen in the Ayrshire deal that would have drawn down funding in their earlier years unfortunately weren't commercially viable for a number of reasons, and that's no fault to the Ayrshire growth deal, and right now they've been working for the past year actually in reviewing other commercially viable projects. North and East Ayrshire have managed to conclude that process. South Ayrshire Council are just at that moment to conclude that as well, and that then almost lets them reset the deal in that stage to ensure that money, which we have confirmed with them, the 206 million overall for the Ayrshire growth deal, remains committed. They have 6 more years of the deal in place, and we want to try and ensure that the projects they take forward are commercially viable and able to make the best use of that funding for the region.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. If you look at the project list, though, there's 18 projects in the Ayrshire growth deal. 2 of them we know have been dropped. There's another 10 that haven't drawn down a single penny in 5 years. 10 projects haven't drawn down 1 penny in 5 years. That's more than a problem with just 2 projects that have had to be dropped. That suggests to me there's a wider problem there. And this is one of the few opportunities that the parliamentary committee gets to scrutinise the growth deals. We don't have a formal scrutiny role, as you know. We're not part of the partnership boards and so on. Do you think there needs to be a revisit of how that scrutiny picture actually looks like, to give Parliament and its committees and its members here an opportunity to have some kind of involvement and oversight of progress?
Well, let me answer the scrutiny point, and then if there's any further points to make about Ayrshire growth deals. So in terms of the scrutiny, so governance arrangements are built in. So I guess to go back to the convener's opening question around additional structures and whether or not they're required, the purpose of those additional structures is accountability and scrutiny, is being able to share the scrutiny across the different partners that are involved. I appreciate, because it's been put to me last time I was at committee, that the committee has an appetite for scrutiny, and that's absolutely right, and there's an opportunity particularly for scrutiny of the Scottish Government. But quite obviously, where you have local partners involved, local authorities involved, MSPs don't have a duty of scrutiny over local authorities, and nor do you have a duty of scrutiny over UK government. So that is why the additional governance was built in order to try and deal with the fact that it was over essentially 3 jurisdictions. Anything to add on other projects?
Yeah, just so the number of projects are being reviewed by the Ayrshire deal, and there is some amalgamation of projects, some of the digital projects in particular that are also inviable alongside the spaceport activity. So that number, I think it's also important to flag that drawdown isn't really reflective and true of the amount of work that Ayrshire are progressing with the projects that haven't yet secured full business case and therefore able to draw down funding as well. So there's an awful lot of work behind the scenes with the Ayrshire deal and those other projects which aren't changing but will secure drawdown in the future. So I think that sort of total drawdown to date figure isn't also reflective of work, preparatory work, feasibility work that is going on in some of the other projects which will draw down in this year. So I'm thinking of the Great Harbour project in Irvine. There's been a lot of success with the community wealth building project as well. Some of the resource projects in the Ayrshire deal have been really successful. So there is a lot of work still to go, and I appreciate that from the figures, but there's a lot of preparatory work that's taken place to help safeguard the delivery of the remaining funds for the last 6 years of the deal.
Okay, Kate, you kindly said that the commitment to the funding is still there, and to give Ayrshire the time to redevelop and repurpose some of the project ideas. And I asked the same question of Ian Murray 3 weeks ago, and he said there is no threat to that funding at this moment in time. So you can take from that what you will, convener, but he said with every week that passes the funding becomes smaller because of inflation. So is it reasonable to expect that funding pot to sit there unused, untapped for such a prolonged period with the progress that we're seeing?
My comment would be that, as we've outlined, that funding is committed. I would challenge the point that inflation is only an issue for Ayrshire. It's quite clearly been a challenge for projects in every single growth deal. So particularly those that are in the throes of build or of construction, who have been hit with challenging hikes in inflation and the cost of materials. So it's an issue that we've grappled with right across the country. On the Ayrshire growth deal, I appreciate that the last few years have been difficult. I'm really excited about what I think might happen next. And a lot of this is still in the territory of commercial sensitivity. But in terms of the replacement projects, it's actually a hugely exciting moment for Ayrshire, because they are aligning all of their collective interests around new proposals. And I was, as you know, visiting Ayrshire College a couple of months ago, and I was absolutely blown away by the number of businesses and developers investing in the area, the ambitions of the college, and how integrated all partners are. So at this moment, because we are very much in the midst of discussion, can't divulge what might happen next, although I'm sure that Willie Coffey will be quite familiar with what some of the plans are. But if we can just get to that point where everything is agreed, there's an appetite from the UK government to move at speed. We want to move at speed. I know the local authorities want to move at speed. This is going to be huge.
Okay, thank you for that. My last question, Convener, is on the subject of AI. You mentioned the Robotarium and the AI project in Edinburgh, which is a growth deal project. But allied to that, of course, is the Exascale supercomputer project. It was not part of the growth deal, but it's so closely aligned with that whole project concept for Edinburgh. We asked the Secretary of State about this 3 weeks ago as well, and our understanding, everyone's understanding, was that that investment was earmarked for Edinburgh. But he told us when his government came into office there was no money behind that project whatsoever, £900 million worth of investment for Edinburgh for that supercomputer. But what he didn't tell us that it was being shifted to Oxford. So between last 3 weeks ago and now, we've discovered that the supercomputer is being built, but it's being built in Oxford. And alongside the announcement last week that about £78 billion of investment in the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor, which will presumably encompass this Exascale supercomputer. Do you think Edinburgh and Scotland's been short-changed by these decisions?
Well, I know that there is a lot of disappointment felt by the university, by other stakeholders and by ourselves about the failure to deliver on the promise of the supercomputer. It would make a huge difference in Scotland. It would sit right at the heart of the university's ambitions, and I strongly, strongly urge the UK government to honour the commitment that was made to Edinburgh.
Is that announcement effectively another growth deal? I mean, the convener was talking about different models of putting money into areas within the UK. Is that £79 billion investment effectively a new growth deal, but for the Oxford-Cambridge corridor?
Well, I am very unfamiliar with all the intricacies of the Cambridge-Oxford corridor, and so I can't comment on that. What I do know is that the Edinburgh and South East region growth deal, perhaps uniquely amongst growth deals, focused on data-driven innovation. It focused on technology. It focused on job creation through the inherent strengths of our universities and our colleges. A supercomputer would sit at the very heart of that, and I am ambitious to see as much funding invested in Scotland and in Edinburgh as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, convener.
Okay. Do you have a supplementary, Daniel? Or?
Yes, I do. So just further to that, I mean, my understanding is that the exascale computer is still part of live discussions, and I was just discussing it yesterday with the Principal of University of Edinburgh. Just wanted to confirm whether that was the Deputy First Minister's understanding, and that her understanding is that decision would be appearing in the spending review, which we expect in the summer.
Well, that would be great news if it is. I am unaware of that, so I will take the members' comments on board. That is not something that I am familiar with, but we all very much therefore look forward to the spending review. I think if that is the university's understanding, great. It doesn't appear to be some of the stakeholders in and around the university's understanding, but I imagine we all await an update. Just
to clarify, I mean, it was the Secretary of State for Scotland who was saying that that decision would be a feature of the spending review. So just to clarify, I think while there is an announcement in Oxford, that is not in place of the exascale. That is still under consideration. I was just wondering if the Deputy First Minister has had dialogue and discussions, given she's taking such a keen interest in it, about the importance of this and about more broadly the spending review.
Well, I have obviously raised these matters with the UK government as recently as about a month ago, I believe, in written correspondence. I do not, to my knowledge, have any extensive update beyond what the member has shared today. So I will happily, on behalf of both the committee and others, pursue further information. But I certainly don't appear to have anything that's sort of rock solid. So I thank the member for that.
Can I bring in Kevin Stewart?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. We've heard evidence that the governance, the set-up of city and regional growth deals was really done to suit English combined authorities. And you yourself, DFM, said that there are unique elements to all here, and things have been shaped by local circumstances. We have some very different governance situations. Glasgow has the political leaders' cabinet. In the northeast, there is more of an element of public-private governance. Has the government looked at what has worked best, what has worked well, and what maybe needs to be done in terms of learning for the future?
Yeah, so we can't make any changes to deal governance unilaterally. It has to be done in consultation and collaboration with the UK government, because the governance structures have been defined in partnership with the UK government. We are working currently with the UK government to consider whether we could further streamline deal governance. And if the team want to provide an update on that work, that might be useful. But by and large, yes, we have learned. As deals have evolved from the early ones, we have learned lessons and made changes as a result. We have annual conversations to discuss progress, and that's informed by each of the city region deals annual performance report. But ultimately, this has been an iterative process. We do have the Scottish City Region and Growth Deals Delivery Board as well, and that is a partnership between the UK and the Scottish governments, and the primary responsibility of that board is to provide assurance and advice to ministers on all deals. So there is a structure that sits above all deals as well.
Okay, in terms of best practice, is best practice shared through that board as well? Is there an overview of what projects have worked and what have not? It has been said, and I don't know if I coined it or if somebody else did, but often the projects are not the people's priorities per se. There's reasoning for it, but not necessarily the people's priorities. So how do you take an overview of all of that and make sure that, you know, the best practice is brought to bear from some of the older deals into some of the newer ones, like Ayrshire, like Argyll, which is about to come on stream?
So can I separate the two into whether or not the deals have performed well from how we establish governance structures? So in terms of the performance, there are, because they are long-term strategic programmes, getting the sort of quicker evaluation is less important than the longer-term benefits that have been delivered. But built into the governance structures is a constant ongoing evaluation of what is working and what is not working. And where, for example, when it comes to Ayrshire, it is determined that changes are required, we can implement changes. There are other changes, for example, in the Highland growth deal, where changes have been made, and there's other examples elsewhere. So local authorities are ultimately the ones, you talked about local people. Local authorities are responsible for proposing, for developing, for delivering, for monitoring, for maintaining the projects supported via their growth deals. Those functions are overseen then by the formal governance structures which oversee the delivery of deal programmes at regional partners. That is still led by local authority partners, and in each deal there is an accountable body, one local authority that is accountable to the Scottish Government for the use of growth deal funding, and then we manage that growth deal funding on behalf of both governments. So that is the structure that sits around it. Whether or not the deals reflect the people's priorities is not so much for me to say, because they have been agreed by local partners that I expect to be responding to local demands.
Thank you for that, and I think we would all expect that, but I don't know if we necessarily get that at points. I think one of the things for me is we've got a situation where all are different, and some of them, you know, are now that decade old, like Glasgow, with its structure. Aberdeen City and Shire is somewhat unique in terms of how it grew, because it grew from an existing forum, the Aberdeen City and Shire Economic Forum, which became Aberdeen City and Shire Economic Future. A lot more input from the private sector, like the Edinburgh and South East deal, a focus not so much on infrastructure, but on jobs, and jobs for the future and projects that would create jobs for the future. What I'm keen to see, Deputy First Minister, is that input from all to come up with those projects that are really going to ensure economic success, not just today, but for a lot of tomorrows. Do you think that we've learned enough around about what has happened in Aberdeen, which has kind of been organic in terms of its growth, when it comes to even the new ones like Argyll?
The Aberdeen one is absolutely brilliant in terms of the focus it's had on innovation, on transition, essentially, because it's been about creating new jobs. And from the Net Zero Technology Centre, the BioHub, digital infrastructure, and so on, it has really focused on making Aberdeen the capital of innovation and so on. So I think there is a lot to learn. And I would agree with you that there is to overuse the word unique again, there is a unique element to Aberdeen where it feels like there is private sector ownership as well. That is replicated in some of the others, but I think in Aberdeen it's particularly noticeable. So that, and it comes to an end obviously in 2027. So at that point we will be able to look back and reflect on all that has been achieved. It's not the only investment that has been made. We also have the investment that comes through the Murray and North East Transition Fund, as well as some other specific initiatives in and around transport. And there has obviously been funding extensions as well. So that would be my short answer, if I've answered your question accurately.
So you talked about more ownership by the private sector. Equally, you'll see, I'm quite sure from the briefings that you've had, that there's also been much more private sector investment in that deal. So I think, you know, it probably shows that, you know, that multifaceted ownership of it means that folk are more willing to put their hands in their pooches, as we would say in the North East, to actually help fund some of these projects as well. So I think, you know, in terms of the learning, that's something that we should all be looking at without a doubt. You said yourself there that that deal is due to come to an end in 2027. What's the next stage for city-region deals? Can we expect a Aberdeen City and Shire City-region deal Mark II in 27 when the current deal ends? Well,
on that private sector involvement, obviously one Opportunity North East is a key signatory to the deal, and so has a seat at the Joint Economic Committee and has played a significant role in coordinating but also in investing in those deals. In terms of the future of deals, the government is very open to discussions about what comes next, and we have started some conversations with the UK government on that question. We are also aware that the UK government is actively considering this question, and so the test will be whether or not each government can keep the other well informed about their thinking about the next phase of local growth plans. Whilst I appreciate the Aberdeen growth deal may be coming to a conclusion shortly, we are only halfway through the 20-year deals programme, with 2 deals only moving into delivery this coming year. So we can't lose sight of effective delivery of the current deal commitments and continuing to maximise value for money. But I do think that the model of the growth deals, in terms of that tripartite involvement, has been absolutely brilliant. Anyone who has an interest in how economies perform well in small, independent countries will see one of the key elements is where there is long-term agreement shared by lots of different partners on what success looks like. And to an extent, the growth deals is the first time we've had something like that. Long-term agreement shared by different partners. So I think it's an excellent model going forward.
Thank you. My final question, Convener, because I don't think anybody would disagree around about partnerships actually helping to make things work. But you talked about the tripartite agreement between the UK government, the Scottish government, local authorities. But I think, you know, in terms of the discussion that we have just had, we can grow that even more to a quadpartite agreement which involves the private sector as well, to ensure that we're maxing out not only the public sector investment but the private sector investment, as has happened in the north east of Scotland. Do you think that that should be the ambition for the future?
Yes, and the regional partnerships that we now have across the country were reinvigorated partly because of my engagement with Opportunity North East and how they had delivered so much by working collaboratively, private sector and public sector jointly committed to job creation and so on. And there is no shortage of opportunities to continue to do that in the North East. If I think of the ETZ, the investment zones, the need to invest in transition, Acorn project, all the potential right now to invest in the North East, it requires close collaboration, and we know that we can do it based on the growth deal experience, and we know we have a very willing and capable and resourced private sector partners to do that.
I could ask a lot more questions, but
I'm sure
better
you could,
bring
Kevin,
that to an end,
absolutely.
Convener. Thank you very much, DFM.
I'll bring in Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning. I wanted to ask some questions around about finance and funding. First of all, local spend. Having looked through some of the annual reports, but find it difficult to identify how much local spend there was. Now, Edinburgh is good. It highlights that it's had 80% of its labour spend and 80% of the overall spend has been, 82% has been spent locally. But in other annual reports, there isn't even a mention of what the local spend was or the number of local jobs created, etc. So, bearing in mind that city growth deals are a mechanism for growing the local community economy, what guidance is issued by the Scottish Government to encourage local growth deals to actually use local supply chains and local companies?
So, in terms of how we monitor funding to begin with, so that funding is monitored through very rigorous governance frameworks. So, Section 95 officers in local authorities verify the eligibility of claims, they ensure compliance with the deal agreements, there are regular financial reports from accountable bodies, and those are viewed by Scottish Government officials to track expenditure, the milestones and progress. And then there's an annual statement of compliance, which is agreed as a condition of the grant that is released annually. I mentioned to somebody else that we then have the City, Region and Growth Deals Delivery Board, and that includes representatives from Scottish Government and UK Government to oversee deal progress. So we evaluate all of that. I think in your question you were asking about spend on local supply chains in particular. So Kimberly, do you want to?
Yeah, certainly. So in Inverness and Highland, approximately 85% of the spend has been retained in the Highlands and Islands area. In Edinburgh and South East Scotland, as you've just highlighted, 82% of the spend and 77% of the labour has been used from the local region. On the Glasgow deal, 147.6 million of infrastructure spend has been on local companies. So we do have that information, and if it's not as visible as it could be, then we certainly work with partners to ensure that that's included in future annual reports. So those three deals are the more established deals for which we have a lot of that information, and the others that are getting projects off the ground will ask for similar information.
It would certainly be helpful to have that information available within the reports, and currently aren't as explicit as you've actually stated, other than the City of Edinburgh one. So it would be helpful if that was the case. The other part I was going to ask about was inflation. Now, most of these deals, you've already touched upon it, about impacts in every city deal, inflation. Now, most of the deals, the heads of terms were agreed prior to 2021, if not all signed.
At that time, inflation was around about 1.5%. It's then crept up to 10% in tail end of 2022, and that's had a major impact on what can and cannot be delivered. But the Scottish Government funding is fixed, as is the UK Government funding is fixed. So, you know, how do we achieve what the deals originally wanted to do? And have you been approached by any of the growth deals requiring or requesting additional funding?
So inflation has undoubtedly had a massive impact on the projects. It's impacted budgets. Obviously, that's particularly the case for infrastructure projects. Yeah. And we manage those challenges through collaboration with all of the partners to reassess budgets, to identify efficiencies. Where there are significant changes in project design that are identified by regional partners, they are then assessed through a formal change control process. And significant projects would require ministerial clearance to ensure alignment with the original objectives for each deal, which is what we're going through with, for example, Ayrshire. Mm-hmm. But does anybody want to come in on specific examples? Because I know we have a few of them. Yeah, Kate.
Yep, Mr MacDonald, if I can refer to Glasgow, because I know that they came to the committee in terms of evidence. So in 2022-23, they did an entire review of the wider Glasgow programme just because of that, to assess the viability of the entire programme that was still to be developed and to understand the inflationary impacts. Because whilst there is a budget for inflation covered when the deals are signed and project costs, that obviously wasn't going to take into account, and particularly because it's in the Glasgow deal, for example, that inflationary impact is compounded by the length of the programme. And they undertook that work to assess the viability, and they actually, with ministerial approval, were able to secure funding for the sort of environments within their programme, where funding previously aligned to the Clyde Metro project was then used to secure viable projects and inflationary top-ups almost, you would say, to safeguard those projects that were most affected within the Glasgow deal. So we are seeing that. So that's just a Glasgow example. We've other examples in the North East and within Tay, where other funds from Scottish Enterprise, the enterprise agencies are using other Scottish Government funding, such as the Just Transition funding, are examples of where local authorities or the partners are pulling together available external funding sources to ensure that the projects continue, alongside standard approaches in terms of value engineering and maybe phasing of projects and looking at retrofits as opposed to new build. So there's a whole suite of things that the partners have been doing to tackle the really challenging situation in terms of inflation.
I think I would just add that the tackling inflation doesn't always need to mean de-scoping of the projects. There are some examples of where local authorities have been very innovative in their approach to delivering the same outcomes, but just through slightly different and more cost-effective models. For example, in STEM learning, there was originally plans for a number of hubs, but they've changed to have a few hubs and a mobile outreach that enables them to reach into more rural areas. So and deliver more cost effectively. So there's some examples of really good innovative working with the local authorities to manage within the new cost inflation environment.
Okay. So one of the things Kevin Stewart picked up on was about the need to have private partners, and all of the annual reports talk about what they're trying to achieve. In fact, the Glasgow one says lever in an estimated £3.3 billion of private sector investment to support the delivery of the projects. So how is that measured, given the pressure on the budgets from inflation? And I know what you've said about value engineering and how we're dealing with it, but are we still going to achieve the leverage from the private sector that we're expecting to achieve, and how is that being measured and reported?
In the Glasgow context, they have the Glasgow Intelligence Hub, which is a sort of dedicated unit that tracks those sort of targets. So the 3.3 billion leverage was a figure that was assigned at the very start of the deal, along with the kind of jobs targets, and that's something that they continue to track. Okay. So I think, obviously, that as the deal progresses, and they're now moving into the second phase, into the 10th year anniversary this year of the deal, that's still something they want to track. But I think they are still confident that investment can happen. We've certainly not been alluded to the fact that would differ, but I think how that investment and some of the projects that I've mentioned have changed, and we encourage change to secure that investment going forward. But certainly that is something that is continually tracked and is part of the gateway reviews process that I alluded to earlier as well. So Glasgow have a sort of 5-yearly gateway process as well, and that's one of the key indicators that we tracked in that.
Okay. And my last question, we touched upon this earlier about what happens next, and you said you had started discussions with UK government. I'm just wondering how concerned you are about funding for future growth deals, bearing in mind that in September 24, the UK government paused the funding for the Argyll and Butte deal. It's been reinstated, but it was paused. And when Ian Murray was in front of this committee, he wouldn't sign up to multi-year, or he wouldn't guarantee multi-year funding. So how concerned are you going forward for any new deals, given that there's been 2 indicators that suggest that it might not be a possibility?
Everything is hanging on the spending review, the UK government's spending review. So we had been told during the autumn months that for anything multi-year, or indeed for big infrastructure spend or big capital spend, it would all happen in the spending review. So we await that and await confirmation of what will be in the spending review. And prior to the spending review, it's very difficult for me to give any indication of what the UK government might or might not do, or indeed what we may or may not be able to do. We desperately want to be in a position of giving multi-year certainty to partners. In order to do that, we need to have that multi-year certainty ourselves. And there are a number of commitments that have been made to Scotland, to local partners. There's some in the northeast. There are some, particularly in the northeast, where there has been commitment to investment that we still don't have completely confirmed yet, and we hope it might be in the spending review.
Okay, thanks very much.
Can I bring in the Deputy Convener?
Good morning. Just picking up on that point that Gordon MacDonald raised, it's something that's come up in the committee before, and from a legal perspective, I explored it with the Secretary of State for Scotland, where, whilst both the Scottish Government and the UK Government both have a seat at the table, I had asked him who ultimate legal liability rested with once commitments had been made, and he confirmed that that was the Scottish Government. Now, you may have a view on that, but logically following on from that, then, if funding is withdrawn or paused vis-à-vis the spending review by the UK Government, whilst the Scottish Government has made commitments, if the Scottish Government's on the rack, from a legal liability perspective, that represents quite a significant risk. And I wondered what risk assessment had been made of that by the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Thanks. Anne-Marie, do you want to?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of parts to your question. I think just to circle back to what we mentioned earlier around the board, which is co-chaired with UK Government and Scottish Government, HMT actually sit on that and are a member of that board as well. So they have full visibility of, if you like, the totality of the commitments that are being made with the strength of a deal, a signed legal commitment behind them. And that deal has been signed by both Scottish Government and UK Government. So I don't think there's any misunderstanding around the extent to which those existing deal commitments need to stand. In terms of the point you were making about the Scotland office, who are our counterparty to that governance process, we're not at the time a spending department. So therefore the money flows directly from HMT to Scottish Government, and that includes the UK Government funding as well. So we are the accountable body for the discharging of all of that funding to local government. So I think probably technically there is a question there around as accountable body, but I think the fact that there is joint governance between both parties with HMT on that board means there is no dubiety or uncertainty around the extent to which those legal commitments will be honoured as being signed by both parties.
So a risk to monitor rather than a risk of significant concern.
Could I add a risk that I think the most significant risk is a budget risk? So because the money flows through us, where we have to therefore manage the projects across years. So whilst all of this is managed by a distinctive governance arrangement, at the end of the day, it still all goes through our budget. So where a project is sitting between years, or it has the impact of inflation, or there are delays to the project, then we still have to manage those projects financially. And so where there has been, for example, a realignment of budgets, so where there's been a formal request from a partner for budgets to be allocated to different projects, that is probably the most significant risk that rests on our shoulders, and it is no different from any other financial risk that we still have to balance our budget. We still have to balance it irrespective of what is happening with local projects on the ground, particularly the bigger infrastructure projects.
Okay, thank you. And just one more point off that. I noticed that, we were talking earlier about the announcement by Rachel Reeves on Wednesday in terms of the AI corridor. And it struck me as somewhat ironic that at the same time she was making an announcement that the Green Book would be looked at with a view to ensuring that there wasn't the same dominant focus on projects entirely in the London and the South East, whilst at the very same time announcing that they wanted to create an AI kind of corridor, and she's centred Oxford at the heart of that rather than Edinburgh, as we talked about earlier. Have you had any further indication of what the implications of these Green Book changes might mean in terms of city and region deals for Scotland?
Anne-Marie.
So the Green Book is a complex thing to navigate, and we know that. I think that partly what has been indicated from the UK Government is, I guess, a recognition, potentially from partners who are not based in that South East area, that they potentially don't see that it is always taking account of all of the factors around which benefits, what value is accruing, and how do you count value? Is that a monetised? Is that a BCR ratio? Is it, or is it actually something else in terms of the policy impacts you're trying to achieve? I think that makes complete sense. Actually, the guidance around the Green Book already permits that non-monetised benefits can be considered when looking at a case. And I think that we do that on existing projects and projects coming through for the deals. However, I think that there's always going to be a tendency to go to what the metric is. What's the maths I can do? And I think that any opportunity to ensure that the balance is correct and that is probably welcome. There will always be a challenge where you have issues, for example, with lower population density, with rurality, issues affecting what comes out, what the metric spits out when you do the calculation. But in actual fact, where there are clear reasons around other rationale for a project intervention to address a policy initiative, depopulation, ensuring equality, maximising the reach of a project, potentially to those who are furthest from the labour market, we need to ensure that we can take the totality of the value that a project is delivering, not just that one monetised metric. But that is often, I think, the easiest thing for people to look at. So I suspect, and I would have to surmise, that that's partly what's behind just ensuring that the guidance and that the Green Book actually is clear on that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very clear and albeit technical answer. But I suppose the point I was making, which is perhaps more one for the Deputy First Minister, that despite looking at the Green Book and accept what you're saying, it seems somewhat ironic to look at the Green Book to remove a relentless focus on London South East, to then put a relentless focus, potentially going forward, on the kind of Oxford-Cambridge corridor without being aware that there was already excellence in the extreme in Edinburgh University in the first place, that money had been committed, potentially is now back on the table and remains uncertain. So I suppose that was more the...
Well, in response, this committee will be more aware than any other about the exciting, ambitious initiatives that are happening right now in the Scottish economy. So a report last week identified the incredible strengths in each of our cities, whether it's fintech in Edinburgh, whether it's life sciences in Dundee, whether it's energy transition in Aberdeen, and I could go on. But to pursue growth right now is to invest in Scotland, because of the huge potential, the eye-watering potential right now. And it's one of my great privileges to engage with the investors, the developers, the industries that are driving that pursuit of prosperity, and right across Scotland. So in areas that have previously been left behind and forgotten, they have become the epicentres of much of that activity. So if I were delivering a speech to reset, as the Chancellor did last week, the pursuit of prosperity and the pursuit of growth, I would be talking about investing in Grangemouth and focusing effort on Grangemouth as part of our industrial heartland. I would be talking about investing in our financial services, our energy transition. I'd be talking about reducing the hurdles right now for developers who are pursuing green projects. That's what I'd be focusing on. And actually last week, I think the primary reference to Scotland was, of course, in relation to an infrastructure project in London and the South East in terms of Heathrow. And, OK, a lot of whiskey and a lot of salmon goes through Heathrow. But I would like to see it go through Scottish airports. I'd like to see it through Scottish ports. I'd like to see that investment. And there is an opportunity for us as a devolved government to invest our capital, between £5 billion and £7 billion of capital per annum. But a lot of the levers around financial services, around energy, around grid connection, around all the things that developers and investors highlight to me as their primary cause for concern, are within the gift of the UK government. So huge opportunity here to really pursue prosperity and growth in Scotland by focusing on Scotland and put Grangemouth at the heart of it.
Thank you very much for that comment. Just one tiny question concerning SMEs and women-led businesses. I mean, obviously, all of the deals are entirely different, but I think it's not unfair to say that the seat at the table that SMEs have and a focus on women-led businesses, you'll know it's an interest of mine, is always heard. And we heard fairly mixed evidence, both from the FSB and Women's Enterprise Scotland, in our evidence session last week. Are you giving any guidance across the entirety of the kind of city and region growth deals as to how they need to keep a relentless focus on making sure SMEs and women-led businesses get a fair cut of the pie?
So engaging with businesses, there are different examples across the country. So we have the Regional Enterprise Council in Edinburgh in South East Scotland, Borderlands Economic Forum, Glasgow Economic Leadership Board. They all bring together business representatives to ensure that local businesses are factored into decision-making and management. In Murray, businesses in the third sector and community representatives have been involved from the earliest stages. And there are there's a business assembly that's been established by regional partners. what sits alongside the growth deals is also the regional economic partners, and I said to Kevin Stewart that was partly reinvigorated by how inspired I was by what was happening in the North East. So I think it's fair to say that different parts of the Scotland are at different stages in engaging well with the private sector. In terms of women-led businesses, that is something that requires specific attention in order to ensure that where there is business engagement, as I've just identified, women are not left out of that work. And I think that needs to be part of a much bigger commitment to engage with female-led businesses.
Okay, thank you.
Much Deputy Convener. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Throughout this inquiry, we've heard a lot from different communities and stakeholders across Scotland. Generally, a very, very positive message about City Deals, what they've been able to deliver, and the added value that they bring, and all the projects that have come on board. And one of the things we're very interested in looking at as a committee is what happens next. And both Kevin Stewart and Gordon MacDonald asked you about conversations you'd had with the UK government, and you said to Gordon that a lot of it hung on the spending review, which I think we understand. But in terms of planning ahead, has the Scottish Government had conversations with partners around what sort of projects might form part of a phase 2 for City Deals? Because if you are in discussion with the UK Government, I think being able to demonstrate there is a pipeline of projects that might form part of round 2 City Deals might be a very useful set of arguments to present.
So I think it's premature to be at that stage for the vast majority of the city and regional growth deals. I think that I said in an earlier answer that we're halfway through a 20-year programme. Some of them are at the very earliest stages. One has still to really commence, and therefore, we have to focus on ensuring that those are delivered and delivered well. But I would say that sitting alongside the city and regional growth deals are other initiatives that are currently jointly managed to a lesser extent than the governance arrangements, I think it would be fair to say, of city and regional growth deals, but are nevertheless really important. So the Green Freeport, for example, in Cromarty, the Green Freeport in Leith, and that is an example of joint arrangements. We have the investment zones. So the UK government, we're expecting sign-off on investment zones in spring 2025. Glasgow City Region and North East have engaged extensively with regional stakeholders to develop proposals for their investment zones. So it may not be badged with growth deal terminology, but they are still very much joint arrangements between Scottish Government and UK Government in those two examples.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to understand that. Maybe I could ask a slightly different question, but also looking forward. Because one of the things we've learnt about the growth deals is how this has been driven by regional working, regional economic partnership. And we've seen, some interesting developments south of the border, the rise of, metro regions, which is seen as a major economic driver. You look at an area like Manchester, for example, the creation of a metro region, how that's driven economic growth in Manchester that puts some Scottish cities to shame. What's the Scottish Government's thinking around the growth of regions as drivers for economic progress?
Yeah, so I am very keen on the principle of regional economic plans. So one of the lesser commented on areas of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation was reinvigorating regional economic partnerships. And they developed regional economic strategies which brought together all the public sector organisations and, my expectation is private sector as well, to develop an economic strategy for their area. Now, it is therefore up to them. What works well in Manchester is the fact that it's not a UK government minister that's micromanaging it. And I would suggest that the same should apply in Scotland, where it is locally, regionally led with the backing and support of the Scottish Government. A couple of weeks ago, I co-chaired with the Scottish National Investment Bank a basically pitch from Highland Council working collaboratively with some of the key developers in their area, a pitch to investors, a joined-up pitch about the opportunities to invest in housing, in infrastructure, and so on. And one individual around the table said they couldn't, they were hugely impressed and hadn't ever seen this before with a local authority and local developers having such a joined-up approach to investors. That's what worked in Manchester, that joined-up, clear, agreed approach to pursuing investment. And it is entirely within the capability and the gift of local partners to do that. We've supported the establishment of the structure and are very keen to see those structures work well.
Well, that's a very interesting answer. So just on the question of structures, of course, what is a major factor in delivering this success south of the border has been having metro mayors who have the authority to drive this forward. So do you think that our current structures allow the political leadership at a local level to make this happen?
Well, this is obviously a very live debate, which I am really interested in. Because the difference in Scotland is that every single one of your constituents is probably represented currently by 4 or 3 councillors, 7 or 8 MSPs, 1 MP. That's a lot of representation. And that's before you start talking about the structures of local authorities. So I guess my concern with copying and pasting a model that works in England is that it is, if you copy and paste it on top of the Scottish structure, I don't think it would work. I think there are ways of working with local authorities to empower them, to support them. But right now, they actually have a lot of power to pursue this, as I demonstrated in the example I gave about Highland Council. So I would much rather look at how we support local authorities to do this with strong leadership. It does require strong leadership, but I'm sceptical of just copying and pasting an English model on top of the Scottish constitutional arrangement, because I struggle to see it working as effectively.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, Convener. We could do an inquiry on this all in itself, but I'm slightly off topic, so I'll leave it there.
I will stick to the topic, but slightly different approach to it, because it is a very interesting one. I mean, the only area that maybe is more cluttered than maybe the number of elected representatives is the economic development landscape. And you've talked about Cabinet Secretary, you've beefed up economic regional partnerships. So we obviously, and you listed, I took a note, enterprise agencies, SNIB, we've got UK National Wealth Fund, possible investment zones, green free ports, all these organisations. And if you're looking to the future, is it a consideration, or is it something that you've talked about, that we actually use those forums that are in place, economic regional partnership, for example, rather than replicating growth deal structures? Or do you still see both of them being relevant if we do look at this in the future?
So I don't think you're comparing like with like, just to be clear. So we have designated areas, geographical areas, in which businesses can access special, special sort of I don't want to say tax breaks, but that's what I'm trying to say. They can access, essentially, reliefs. That's the word I was looking for. They can access special reliefs and around LBTT, for example, around non-domestic rates, enhanced capital allowances, and so on. So that compels an organisation to work together. But actually, when you look at like the Green Freeport, you've got Chief Executive who's doing an excellent job in the form of Callum McPherson, and the same with the fourth Green Freeport. But they are essentially designated geographical areas, so I wouldn't want them to get confused.
I was thinking more about the regional economic partnerships.
And the regional economic partnerships, yeah.
How that interacts with, because it almost looks as if, in some cases, the boundaries are very similar. Albeit Borderlands is a bit more challenging because we include Cumbria, but the boundaries are very similar. So, do you need both structures?
And the regional economic partnerships can then deliver things like the investment zones and so on. So that's why they're not comparing like with like, but the regional economic partnerships should be in a local area what establishes the strategy and then brings in partners that are required to deliver that strategy. So it should be the forum in each area that brings in partners. So you mentioned, for example, the National Wealth Fund, which will have a unique role. It's not the same as Scottish Enterprise, for example. It's not the same as a local authority. It's very different. It's about investing in opportunities. But you need the forum, the Regional Economic Partnership Forum, to actually bring together the local partners to determine what the priorities are. So I would distinguish between them.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'll bring in Lorna Slater.
Thank you very much, Convener. We've heard a lot of positive evidence of the benefits of all three levels of government working together on long-term, multi-year projects. Very broadly, to my mind, the City-Region Deal projects sit in two categories, either infrastructure or community and innovation. Both types of projects have quite different business models, impacts, delivery processes, and it might make sense to manage such different kind of projects in different ways rather than lumping them together under the same scheme with the same governance. So my first question is really just what the DFM's thoughts are on what City-Region deals are for, particularly if another tranche of these deals were to be on the table. Does she think they're best for infrastructure or for innovation?
It's a great question, and they are best for enabling collaboration. So it doesn't directly answer your question, but on both categories, what often holds up the delivery of projects that fall into either category is a failure to collaborate. And what these do is, in principle, break down the barriers to collaborations. It's almost like an agreement up front of what everybody's going to do and then go off and do it. I guess over the last few years, looking at each project, and I'd be interested to hear what the team's answer to this as well is, there will be some projects that were more straightforward to deliver than others, some things that ended up being more complex than others. And that's why in some deals, they have repurposed funding that had been earmarked for Project A to Project B. And some of those projects weren't even on the radar back then. So I don't know if anybody wants to answer what has been easier to deliver.
Yes, certainly in terms of your point there about the different elements of the deals, they're designed as integrated packages of measures to unlock regional economic growth from a range of perspectives. So they include infrastructure, innovation and skills elements that are tailored to individual regional needs and opportunities. We are looking at the governance process currently to see if there are ways that we could streamline it at all to enable faster progress. and whether all projects need to go through the same steps. It's not something that we could unilaterally decide because we're in partnership with UK Government, but we're looking at that in partnership with UK Government just now to establish if there are any ways in which we could streamline governance to make things work better.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is related to ways in which the deals may not work as well when the projects get stuck. Specifically, I'm thinking about the Sheriff Hall roundabout, which is a project that has got stuck. And when I speak to local councillors about the project, they say, oh, we can't do anything to change it or fix it or unstick it because it's part of the UK city region deal. The UK government needs to unstick it. And we had the Secretary for State in to give evidence, and he says the power to make a decision to move forward or to change the project sits with the Scottish Government. So there's a lot of kind of finger pointing. So this is where collaboration goes wrong, where it's always somebody else's fault or responsibility. So the evidence that we've collected as a committee suggests that the relevant report on this particular project and the decision are sitting here with the Transport Secretary on the Transport Secretary's desk. And the DFM has said earlier that there's no desire to hold things up, but this has been in limbo for months and months and months. So does the Scottish Government have the power to make this project work or to redirect funds if they decide it isn't to go ahead, and what's the hold up?
The member in particular will know some of the history of the Sheriff Hall project. As recently as November 2024, the leader of Midlothian Council wrote to Transport Scotland requesting that Scottish ministers take action, stating that it was imperative that progress was made soon. It is important for a project of this scale and significance that appropriate scrutiny does take place, and the report that was submitted following the public local inquiry is under very careful consideration just now. The original inclusion of Sheriff Hall in the deal was driven by regional partners, and so when you demonstrate that as collaboration going wrong, it actually illustrates why all parties need to be at the table to make the decision, because it isn't actually within the gift of any single partner to make decisions. The way it's structured is that we expect local partners to take the lead on decision making, and the deal will be designed and delivered by them. But as funders, we do have an important role to play in overseeing the funding attached to each deal. So my most recent example of Ayrshire is a good point, where a few MSPs had said to me, I hear you're holding up the process. And I'm thinking, well, actually, we're in conversation and we're awaiting just more clarification from Ayrshire. And so I thought, well, wait a minute, if there's different understandings of this, let's just get a meeting. So we got a meeting. This is where we think things are at. That's where you think things are at. What needs to be done? You do that, we'll do that, and we'll meet again in a week. And that just, rather than everybody thinking that the ball is in somebody else's court, actually we're all playing this game of tennis. So, you know, let's get on the court and have a conversation, and that gets things moving.
I mean, I'd love to see things getting moving with Sheriff Hall roundabout in whatever direction it gets moved. So I may write to the Deputy First Minister on that point to see if some facilitation could be done to improve that collaboration. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Things moving in Sheriff Hall roundabout are often not the same thing, I have to say. But I'll bring in Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thanks very much. And given we're getting backing up ministers at the moment, I'll be very kind of quick on some of the points. I was just going to ask Kimberly very quickly. You mentioned earlier that the following Gordon MacDonald's questions about local involvement, it was 85% in the Highland deal, Inverness and Highland. Is that since the changes with the Corran ferries reallocation of money or reprofiling?
The Corran Ferry project hasn't started yet. It's going through a business case development process, and we're meeting the council tomorrow actually to discuss that. So it doesn't include, the spend doesn't include the Corran Ferry because that project hasn't started yet.
Okay, so that 85 is just of utilised funds so far?
Yes.
All right, okay, thanks very much for that. Cabinet Secretary, just looking at the overall kind of talk about redeploying or repurposing money, which I think we can all accept because we don't want it to be used poorly. But do you have a figure or figures for how much funding across all the growth deals has been repurposed, redeployed so far? Is that something that...
I will ask the team if they can provide that if we don't have that to hand, because I imagine we will have specifics for each deal, but perhaps not a round figure. So I'd be very happy to.
And there's still discussions going on, and perhaps some repurposing of other funding that will come out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that conversation will end until every growth deal has reached its conclusion, because they have to respond to whatever economic challenges they're facing.
Yeah.
So none of us could have envisaged inflation hiking, but for example, during COVID, there were some requests about changes because of prices increasing, decreasing, and actually projects that they felt were no longer a priority.
Yeah. And, sorry, did you want to come in?
No, I was just to provide just that kind of figure. So to date, from the programme, about 1.1 billion of the 3.4 billion funds had been awarded to councils as accountable bodies for the deals. So there's still the remaining funds for the remaining 10 years of the deals. Now, not all of that fund will be in repurposing, and that's, as the Deputy First Minister said, we can look at that. But I think it shows that there's still a significant amount of government money still to be released from the next 10 years of the programme.
Okay, and just with those, we talked about accountability and those how those funds can be repurposed, but there may be projects that that the government looks at and thinks that the primary authority, the local authorities, I think you said. I suppose if you have concerns over some of the repurposed money, how can you kind of raise those, and who can put a final? Who can have put a stop to that if there's a concern that something's not going to be met, the money's not going to be used?
Well, I'll ask the team to just go through the process of how any part of the tripartite group can raise concerns. But by and large, the bottom line is that these deals are local authority led. So we expect the local authority to propose their priorities, to manage the business case, to then deliver on those priorities. And we are involved in the governance and the funding. So it is a local partner-led scheme.
Just to be clear on that, because obviously the Scottish Government had to give permission, say, on the coronavirus money, as did the UK Government. Those funders, the main funders, as in the UK Government and the Scottish Government, can veto a repurposing if they don't agree with its use?
Well, it goes through quite a rigorous process in terms of the local authority would submit a change request, which they did in this case last summer. They wanted to replace one project with another, as you know. We then approved that request in principle in November 2024. But as Kimberly said, they are now working on an outline business case to demonstrate the full economic merits of that project. You'll know, but it's worth saying again, I'm totally recused from it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Kimberly, do you want... Sorry, Anne-Marie.
I think just to come into that point, about 20 years is a long time, and these projects are not delivering in a vacuum. So there is recognition that circumstances will change, priorities may change, and there may be a very good case to bring forward for why one project is either now no longer viable or no longer a priority, and what they want to replace it with. And that change process exists to recognise that point, that this is a long duration of delivery. What that change process has to demonstrate is how the new project will continue to meet and deliver on the overall objectives of the growth deal. And then there's the decision is both UK Government and Scottish Government, irrespective actually of really whose funds it are. So UK Government asked us about the change to their funds for Corran shoreside infrastructure. So it was their, but that partnership approach to saying, does this make sense to both of us? In the round, does it still deliver on the objectives? And actually, is this a better or at least as good a replacement for the project that was going to be pursued? That's a collaborative process. But change is inevitable because of the nature.
I don't think there's, I mean, certainly from my point of view, I never had concerns about the idea of repurposing. It was just whether funding was being used on things that actually should be coming out of normal government or council funding. Did you want to come in very quickly?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, as others have said, there's a change request process and that all partners need to agree on the funding, and that we look at the economic merits of the project through a business case process, as we will be doing for Corran Ferry and any other project where there's a switch.
That's super. Okay, thanks. Just the last question, because when we had the Secretary of State for Scotland in, we talked about the Corran Ferry, we talked about the Fair Isle Ferry, which is obviously not part of the deal, but he suggested that the UK government wouldn't rule out or wouldn't say no to the possibility of being involved in talks about funding the inter-island ferries replacement, which I'm sure you're aware of, Cabinet Secretary. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that and whether you would welcome that.
Well, we believe that the Scottish Government should be fully funded, that should have a settlement that enables us to meet our priorities, and devolution therefore determines what responsibilities we have and what remains reserved. Transport is devolved. So assuming a settlement that allows us to invest, we therefore should be the ones to determine the national infrastructure transport projects based on consultation and listening to stakeholders. You talked about inter-island ferries, so that would therefore be a local authority responsibility to deliver. And my view is that local partners, Scottish Government, should be able to make decisions that are in line with our priorities, which was why we were so deeply opposed to the way in which the shared prosperity funding and levelling up funding was determined, because it seemed to be quite random, political, erratic, and didn't allow funding to be deployed as efficiently as it could have been.
Yeah, I appreciate there were concerns that were raised quite publicly at the time, but obviously, you know, we are where we are, and the Fair Isle Ferry has got to go ahead. The Corran Ferry is part of the growth deal now, so you will be looking, or you will be looking to speak to the Secretary of State or the UK government about that, if that's something they're willing to talk about.
About the Fair Isle funding?
About the potential of being involved in the wider inter-island ferries replacement scheme, because it's going to be hundreds of millions, if not billions of pounds.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my bottom line is that funding should be given to the appropriate level of government, and that appropriate level of government should then make should be able to fund their priorities. So I think this is a really important principle of devolution and of local authorities. We will work collaboratively with the UK government and local authorities on shared objectives. So of that there is no doubt. The UK government is currently working on what comes next after levelling up and shared prosperity. And I think it should be a means of deploying funding in an efficient way with the agreement of all partners. And it was probably that point around agreement that was missing from previous iterations.
Okay, thanks.
And final questions, Daniel Johnson.
Thank you very much. And I'm very mindful that Ivan McKee is very eagerly waiting to talk about movable transactions. So I'll attempt to keep this as brief as possible, but I don't have a great track record on that count. I want to come back to some of the things that Murdo Fraser was asking about, and actually it relates to Colin Smith. You stated that you didn't think it would be appropriate to copy and paste the structures in England. However, I just sort of observe, if you look at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, if you remove firefighters from their headcount, they only employ around 500 people, covering quite a broad scope of different functions, including economic development, but also skills, education. There's elements of public health in there. So that's less than half of the headcount of Scottish enterprise. And actually, I wonder if so it's actually quite a lightweight structure, and I wonder if actually in Scotland there's maybe a bit of over-focus on the mayor and actually under-focus on the fact that it's actually a combined authority whose members are actually the constituent local authorities. And what that does give you is one place to go and talk, whereas and I hear what you're saying about regional economic partnerships, but right now in Scotland, at a regional level, we've got quite a number of different places you could go and talk, whether it could be the growth deal, could be the regional economic partnership, could even be the health board, depending on what you're wanting to do. But what we don't have is that essentially one place to come and talk to your local authorities. Is that something we should be looking at and thinking about in terms of replicating that function, even if we don't necessarily... Because I think it's not about the structure, it's about that function, which is where there's the...
So this is where Daniel Johnson and I are dangerously in agreement that...
And in agreement with Murdo as well, I think, maybe.
Well, assume... The point here is not to copy and paste a structure without realising what has led to the success of Manchester. And there are a number of areas, first of all, being streamlined, secondly, being really clear about what they want to do, what their priorities are, and thirdly, having a big focus on problem solving, on sorting things out. So if you speak to investors who've worked there, they will say that they have confidence in being able to invest because they know who can fix things. And it's maybe instead of movable transactions, you should ask Ivan McKee about this, because he and I have had a few conversations about what led to the success of Manchester and what we could adapt for Scotland. But it's this pursuit. The other point I would make is that there are areas that are doing this in a slightly different way. So we're talking here about big urban centres, but in our islands, for example, there is an opportunity for a lot of overlap between local authorities and the NHS, for example. But also how we do this on a Scotland-wide basis, and that's what I see part of my role as, which is to make Scotland a great place to invest and to develop, because if you do, we will back you, we will unblock blockages, and we will line you up with the right people. So it's that one-stop shop for getting all your answers to things. And I still personally am of the view that there's nothing that inherently stops a local authority from doing that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a whole evidence session to be taken on that space, but I think it's really interesting, and that's quite a helpful set of observations. I just at the beginning of the session, you said described the growth deals as being primarily about delivering economic growth. However, what's been interesting listening to the evidence actually is much of actually kind of the benefits isn't so much about kind of the GVA, it's more been about efficiency of working and collaboration. I'm just wondering kind of what, whether that's the correct assessment, or is actually there a way of measuring the value of what they have delivered, or is it just that it makes it easier to do that work? So, for example, with the more mature deals, do you have a formal set of metrics, and can you demonstrate the GVA or other economic value that would not be there if those deals did not exist?
So I will ask the team to come in on the technical element of evaluation and measurement. But just on that top line, the purpose is economic prosperity. Mm-hmm. But we are often too quick to dismiss certain initiatives as not being for economic benefit. Investing in health is a means of boosting economic prosperity. Investing in education is a means of boosting economic prosperity. Not exclusively, and not purely for that purpose. But if you think of all the investments that can be made through a growth deal, they are called growth deals for a reason, and they are pursuing economic prosperity. So those economic metrics still do matter. But why do it through a growth deal rather than just through the devolution settlement? Because of the efficiencies, because of the collaboration, and because it compels us all to take a long-term approach, irrespective of who is the chief exec or the leader of a particular local authority.
Okay. So actually, just before you bring in your team on the formal metric side, what you've just said actually related to what I was going to ask in my final question. So if I may, I'll just ask that. I mean, can I ask, do you view these deals as just another means of delivering projects, Or do you view these as being the principal means of delivering kind of regional, particularly regional infrastructure? And if so, that has quite a big bearing about how we think about kind of things like medium-term financial strategies. We've talked about the spending review. Is this the kind of the primary means of delivery, or is it just one means of delivery?
I would suggest it's one means of delivery, because if you look at the investments that are being made in those same locations, geographical areas and communities, then it far exceeds what has been committed through the growth deals. And so the growth deals are a means of delivery that's based on collaboration and long-term goals, but they are not the only means. And I think the North East right now is the best example of what's going on alongside that in terms of investment zone, ETZ, the other transition funds, so on and so forth, and particularly what is led by the private sector. So they can't be the principal, but they are a fascinating study in how to do this well, because even at the height of the breakdown in relations between different partners, whether that was UK, Scottish government, or when local authorities were criticising Scottish government, whatever it was, the growth deals continued to move forward because of the governance arrangements and because of the agreement. And I think that got too little attention because it was really unique in that time where other things were not, like, for example, the Levelling Up and the Shared Prosperity Fund were not agreed on, or at the time of the Internal Market Act, which is still operational. We had the growth deals showing how we could operate on the basis of mutual respect and agreement. Do you still want to hear about the technical?
Yeah, just especially if it's sort of the I always think the way you value something is in comparison to the best alternative foregone. I mean, is there a way that you can measure their value, as compared to what we would have if they didn't exist?
That is a great question for the team, and I think there's a lot of value to them, which it would be very difficult to quantify in figures, and may actually do a disservice if we attempted to quantify it in
so
figures.
I accept that, but are there metrics nonetheless, albeit that they won't capture everything?
Yeah, so I think to come back to the Green Book process, the whole point of that is to set out at the beginning the objectives, what will be delivered. Inherently then there is an expectation of measuring and being able to report and evidence that actually what you set out to do you have done. But through that process and through the actual delivery, be it through annual conversations, be it through the quarterly and monthly monitoring of both teams, what we're looking for is indicators, things to demonstrate that they are on track to delivering the benefits which have been described at the outset. But monitoring and evaluation, you can either have it at the end, which is dangerous because you just discover that it didn't quite do what you thought it was going to do, or you have those output and outcome indicators throughout the delivery of a project, which would give you an indication, if you like, about do we need to take stock, do we need to learn, is there something here that another project and another deal would benefit from understanding in terms of challenges or to delivery. But in terms of the measurement at a project level, they are, as part of that business case process, required to be able to report on the benefits, either on a metric basis, but also to demonstrate the positive returns, the reach. Has it driven enhanced skills provision, the number of beneficiaries, and what that benefit has accrued to? But it will vary project by project. The real challenge in evaluating a programme or portfolio like this is how to aggregate it. Because if everybody's counting or measuring slightly different, that becomes a challenge.
So and I accept there may not be an answer to this, because I accept all that's all really important at that project level and tracking against kind of your delivery against what was promised. I think actually what I'm asking is slightly different. Is actually, can we demonstrate that this is, as a whole, at that aggregate level, that these structures are delivering additional value over and above, just a kind of a mechanism for delivering projects? But that's probably too esoteric a question. But I mean, I think if we're saying that this is a good vehicle for delivering projects, it's just an interesting task. Well, can we demonstrate that, and can we measure that benefit?
So I think what you'll see is from some of the old, more mature, as we call them, deals, their benefit realisation processes and what they're able to publish and report on can demonstrate that much more clearly and cleanly than those which are in the more 2021 type stage. However, there is a requirement for them all to have a benefits realisation management approach, and actually the cross-learning is really important. So the ones who we know are doing it and have a good process to do it well are sharing that through the PMO network with other deals. Edinburgh are a good example of that. They're an exemplar. They have shared and done a lot of learning events with other deals, such that they can either take the model and replicate it or utilise the bits of it that work for their deal. At a point in time, we would hope then to be able to aggregate that and demonstrate it, as you say, at a more portfolio level. But until it's finished, that would be inherently difficult to do, because you wouldn't have the totality of everything until everything has completed.
Great. Well, I think we're in danger of Ivan McKee becoming a movable transaction himself and leaving to go elsewhere. So I'll conclude there, but thank you very much for your answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So that brings us to the end of the evidence session. Can I thank you, Deputy First Minister, and your team for joining us today, and I now briefly suspend the meeting to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Okay, our second item of business today is further consideration of 4 Scottish statutory instruments. There are 2 affirmative instruments, the Movable Transactions Scotland Act 2023 Amendment Regulations 2025 and the Registers of Scotland Fees and Plain Copies Miscellaneous Amendments Order 2025. There are also 2 negative instruments, the Movable Transactions Form Scotland Regulations 2024 and Movable Transactions Register of Assignations and Register of Statutory Pledge Rules Scotland Regulations 2024. Following last week's meeting, the Minister wrote to the committee, which I think members found incredibly helpful, and the Minister's letter of the 31st of January is included at Appendix C to Paper 3. So I welcome back our panel, Ivan McKee, Minister for Public Finance, Camilla Aradona and Rob McConnell, Scottish Government Legal Directorate, Jill Clark, Team Leader at the Private Law Unit at Scottish Government, and David Robertson, Policy Lead at the Registers of Scotland. This item is an opportunity to further discuss all 4 instruments with the Minister and his officials before moving on to the formal procedure at the next agenda items. There's no need for any motions to be moved under this agenda item. That will happen at a later stage. And while I'd be very keen to hear the Minister's views on the success of Manchester, I think I would maybe ask the Minister at this stage just to give us a short opening statement about the subordinate legislation before us today.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Committee, and thanks for the further opportunity to give evidence on the 4 SSIs relating to the Movable Transactions Scotland Act 2023. I hope that my letter of 31st January was helpful to the Committee in providing not only information but reassurance on the range of issues raised by the Committee. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to officials for putting together, I think, a very comprehensive and thoroughly helpful letter in a very short period of time. So I think it's probably worth highlighting the following. Around privacy, it's important to recognise that public registration is the policy solution to help businesses in Scotland by offering a simple and efficient alternative to the outdated and inflexible existing law. Having said that, both the Act and the rules do, however, take measures to ensure that personal information is not disclosed in a way that could enable fraud through restricted searching and appropriate redaction. With regards to corrections, it's important that the registers have a utility for businesses and that they are easy to use. And this, of course, has to be balanced with the utility of them being accurate and up to date. We think that we've struck the right balance, and my letter sets out in some detail the ways in which corrections can be made to the registers, and indeed that it will always be in someone's interest for erroneous or out-of-date information to be corrected. Regarding fraudulent activity, fraud is of course a legitimate concern, and I hope that the details contained in my letter provide some comfort that there are checks in place which will minimise the likelihood of the registers being used fraudulently. I'm of course happy to take any further questions on the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Can I start with just a question seeking clarity in relation to not-for-profit advisors? We've obviously clarified that the Act does allow not-for-profit advisors to search either registers without incurring a fee, but in your letter of the 31st of January, which you create was very comprehensive, and we thank you for that, you indicate that you won't define what a not-for-profit advisor is because you don't believe there will be many seeking to search the registers. But if there are then, and if there are, then you would at that point come up with a definition. But I'm a bit unclear that if you don't have a definition, how will you decide if an organisation is not-for-profit? What would the criteria be? And how will these organisations even be aware of the fact that they can search registers without any particular fee? I mean, if you don't have a definition, then how do you then, for example, decide that you do need a definition because so many have came forward to search the registers?
I'll let officials comment on that shortly, but I think we're probably talking about quite a small number of organisations who would be well known, and that should be manageable with what we have at the moment. So I think that the idea is that rather than spend a lot of time and effort trying to define what that is, when I think we're probably relatively clear as to who's covered by that, this was the most effective and efficient way to proceed. But I don't know if officials have got further comments on that.
Yeah, certainly. I think the Minister is correct in saying that we're not expecting the numbers to be relying on this provision to be very large at all, and I think there's perhaps an issue with defining these types of bodies, in that perhaps you provide a definition and that doesn't cover parties that you would have ideally liked to have covered. So I think the government's position on this is very much to, given that the numbers caught by this will likely be very negligible, to monitor progress and how the registers are used over time, and then use that to perhaps or perhaps not make an informed decision in the future in terms of adding a definition to the regulations.
Okay. You'll be pleased to know I think your letter did cover most of the points that members had, but Leonard Slater, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming back. My questions last week were around the registers of that particular SSI. Thank you for the reassurance in your letter on the mechanisms for correction, accuracy and third-party data, and accepting that no system is perfect or free from error, and that bad actors can abuse any system. I think I'm certainly content to support the progression of these instruments. I do wonder, though, if the Minister, or maybe more properly his officials, would commit to coming back to this committee or its successor in 18 months to 2 years to just give us an update on how that's gone, whether the corrections procedure is working, how many people have required to use it, and so on.
Yeah, I think we're obviously happy to do that. I'll just check if there's anything in the Act or the regulations with timelines for when we would come back as a matter of course.
The Act itself contains a provision for officials for the government to provide a report to the Parliament. I think it's 5 years after it fully comes into force, which hopefully will be the 1st of April. And that will be a large encompassing kind of report on how the entire regime is working in reality, and where there perhaps could be areas that could be looked at again. So there is that provision in the Act as well.
But whether you'd be willing to come back in sort of 18 months to 2 years just to kind of give us an interim, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think we're very happy to do that. It's good that that backstop's there at 5 years, but you're right. We're very happy to come back to the committee and what would effectively be the next session with an update on where we are at that stage, and allow the committee at that point to ask any further questions.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay. Wendell Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. It'll be to the relief of colleagues, I'm not going to raise flocks of sheep or combine harvesters this morning. I just wanted to put on record, actually, we've had an 8-page response from you issued within 48 hours of you appearing at this committee last week, responding to the points that were raised. I think that's excellent work and an exemplar of how ministers should behave.
Thank you very much for that, but as I said at the outset, it's all down to my officials, and I agree that it is an exemplar of how the civil service should work.
Okay, on that very positive point, there are no further questions from members, so I'll move to agenda item 3, which is formal consideration of the motion to approve the first affirmative instrument. As a reminder, only members and the Minister may take part in this agenda item. So I invite the Minister to speak to it and move the motion S6M 15910 that the Economy and Fair Work Committee recommends that the Movable Transactions Scotland Act 2023 Amendment Regulations 2025 draft be approved.
Formally moved, Convener.
Thank you. And can I ask if any members wish to speak? No. So, as there are no members wishing to speak, I'll put the question on the motion. The question is that motion S6M 15910 be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. Okay, thank you. We are agreed, and the motion is therefore approved. We now move to our next item, which is on the Registers of Scotland Fees and Plain Copies Miscellaneous Amendments Order 2025. Again, only members and the Minister may take part in this agenda item. And again, I invite the Minister to speak to and move the motion S6M 15911 that the Economy and Fair Work Committee recommends that the Registers of Scotland Fees and Plain Copies Miscellaneous Amendments Order 2025 draft be approved.
Formally moved, Convener. Okay,
and do any members wish to speak? Okay, there is no member wishing to speak. That, as no member wishes, I'll put the question on the motion. The question is that motion S6M 15911 be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. Okay, thank you. We're agreed. The motion is therefore approved. A report on the committee's consideration on both these instruments will be prepared and published, and I invite the committee to delegate responsibility to myself as convener to agree the committee's report. Everybody is happy with that? Okay, our next item of business is consideration of 2 negative SSIs, the Movable Transactions Form Scotland Regulations 2024 and the Movable Transactions Register of Assignations and Register of Statutory Pledges Rules Scotland Regulations 2024. The committee is invited to note both instruments and we're happy to do so. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's evidence session. Can I thank the Minister and his officials for joining us today, and I suspend the meeting and move to private session.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.